an alternative to war?
Yes, I think there is.
There might be in the future, but with the world as it is, I think that force may be the only way to peace.
I completely disagree with that statement.
There must be an alternative to war, otherwise there won't be any world at all.
This is the opening program in our 1956 High School Forum discussion series. Here tonight to discuss alternatives to war are 4 students from as many countries, part of the forum group of 33. Let me introduce to you first Judith Reeder from the United Kingdom. Judith has to take her entrance exams to Oxford in less than 3 weeks' time, and she's not going to be completely relaxed until that ordeal is over with. We've arranged for her to take them here in the United States. Then Elizabeth Ann Woodgate from Australia. Elizabeth Ann had her first experience ice skating yesterday, and we hope you won't be too uncomfortable, Elizabeth Ann. Naviat Tafari is the first delegate the forum has ever had in its 10 years of existence from Ethiopia. We welcome you especially, Naviat. And Christoph Bertrand from Germany. Within the last hour, Christoph's got a new nickname, Toffee. Now look, let's get back onto our question for tonight. Is there any alternative to war? I think perhaps we ought to start out by finding what any of you know about war from personal experience. How about you, Judith?
Well, I personally was lucky during the war. I lived in a small town away from London, away from the big industrial towns, and so consequently I didn't suffer any of the bombing. But what I remember most clearly about the war was that my father was away all the time. He was in Germany, and I remember clearly how worried my mother was all the time. And I remember having to get under the bed when the sirens went. But,
what about Australia?
Well, of course, we didn't have any bombing like England did. But my father was away, and my uncle was a prisoner of war in Germany. And I know there was a lot of tension at home, and my mother was always very worried. And when Daddy came home on leave, there was always great joy and excitement. We all wanted.
Well, what about Germany? Where were you during the war, during the beginning of it, Christoph?
I don't think that there's time enough to count all those places, you know, as we came from Berlin to some place in Austria, and then we came to Pommern, that is up in the eastern corner, or some of the eastern corners of Germany. Then we fled.
So what do you remember most?
Oh, what I remember is that my father was away during the whole war, and even longer. He was taken prisoner of war in 1940 and came back in 1947. He was in Australia.
Well, a quid pro quo. How about you, Navy? Do you remember anything about...
I haven't physically suffered from the war, but the fact that my mother was in worry all the time was that my father was in Rome. And
you're talking about the Italo-Ethiopian War now.
Yes, it started in 1936 and lasted till 1941. And the fact that my parents were, my relatives and parents were wearing black coats, wearing black because my uncle was burnt alive by Italians.
Let me ask you how serious you think the threat of war is today. You scarcely remember the last one, or as you say, you weren't really in the worst of it. How serious do you think the threat of war is today?
Well, I think there is very lot of tension in the world, and it only needs a little match, and this match to be held to the tension and it'll explode. There are so many places in the world that are full of this tension, full of the danger that it might be might explode there, and I think therefore the situation is very dangerous in this case, and it's very you got to be well.
It's only in the major countries that there is such tension, though, because out in Australia, I mean, I don't call Australia a major country, of course, very important to me, but there's not very much tension actually in Australia, but there is. When I've come over here to America, I've seen the tension that there is. And in Russia, I should imagine, it would be very similar.
It's a strange question, because you'd think that England, having suffered in the last war, would be very afraid of another war. But speaking for the average person over there, I think we're sort of relaxed nowadays. Yes. There may be political tension or economic tension in the world, but at home we think the world is over, and the young people over there, naturally we're worried about communism, but not as worried as perhaps some other European countries, such as Germany, for instance.
You know, Germany is divided, and we have a long frontier with the Russian zone, and we meet a lot of people from the Russian zone, and we talk things over with them, and we get overwhelmed and very much impressed by things they tell us. You know, it is I think it's a strong tension in Germany and among the people. They don't really want to think of another war, and so they push it away and just live their life, and they are afraid of the thought, you know, of war.
As you look back since the end of the war in '45, how would you say this threat of a new war has developed? What's made it develop? What are the factors?
Oh, we could count a lot of political events, I think, that are on this, but I think the thing that has developed us most strongly was the Cold War between the West and the East, and all the and sometimes when the Cold War broke out and became a hot war, like in Korea, this tension grew, and it was growing when we heard about the weapons in the Middle East and things like that. And it is growing when I personally come to West Berlin or things like that and see what is done and what is happening.
But Christoph, you said a moment ago that in Germany people don't think about war very much because they don't want it to happen, and yet you're right there with the Russians across the frontier. I should think it would be nearer to you.
Perhaps that's why they don't want to think of it, because it's so near to them. Whereas, go on, you go.
We really fear the thought of war, you know, and that's why if I settle down and begin to think about this really deep, and I would come to the conclusion that it's almost silly to build up things or to go to school anymore, to learn things, as the danger is so near to you. But we push it off, and that's why how we can live, I suppose.
It's a strange thing that you, in Germany, being so close to the communists, they should try and push the thought of war away from them. It's rather different in England. They try and push the thought of war away, of course. But I think that the tension, if there is any tension, is aroused mainly through ignorance. We don't know the communists because, well, to us, you're in Germany, you do see communists come over, don't you? Yeah. But we don't. All we know about the communists is we read about them in the papers. And, well, some of the papers purposely try and perhaps give us a false impression of them. And to the average British person, it doesn't seem humanly possible that the Russians are ordinary people like us.
Exactly the same
We get a wrong impression of us, and I'm sure that's partly why the tension is there. Either the politicians want
excuse me, Judith, you're being awfully quiet.
Oh,
Does
wow.
this current Cold War between East and West, is it of interest in Ethiopia? Does it affect your thinking at all?
Yes, as Ethiopia is now busy progressing in the field of Western civilization, she couldn't afford spending much time and money and energy on armaments and pursuing the political doctrines of the West and East. As for politics, she is more likely on the democratic part. People seem not to understand communism quite well in Ethiopia.
Do you have any communist party there?
No. None to speak of.
Well, you see, it's quite, what you stated of Great Britain, it might be a little similar to Germany, as people are, through economical, what they gain economically, they're a little, quite a lot of them are quite satisfied. And, you know, they don't take the trouble of thinking of the other side. Quite a lot of them do this. And that is the trouble we have. You know, if we don't keep thinking and helping the other side, the people in the eastern zone, there might be a danger of and there will be the danger of that this piece of land will be cut off, and the people who live there and are in connection with us, should be in connection with us, are cut off too.
You know, that's why I think that there is no alternative to war, that we don't really know the other side's point of view. And I don't think it's till every person in every land has been raised to a much higher level of civilization, that we will be able to have peace by peaceful methods.
Let me go back just a moment to the war you know, the war in 1939. Was there any alternative to war, do you think, in 1939?
Oh, gosh, if I were a politician, maybe I could answer that, but it seems to me from what I've read and what I've heard that, well, for Britain there wasn't. We'd waited too long already. In the first place, if we tried to stop it before in 1936 or somewhere earlier like that, maybe we could have done, but by 1938 and 9, it was too late. We'd let Hitler get too... Oh, well, you will. You will. But
I really think that Britain need not have gone to war. I know that it would have been hard, but it would have been morally much better for her to have let the Germans occupy England. I know everyone will disagree with me when I say this, but didn't Jesus said, if you're hit on one side, you should turn the other cheek. Yes, I know it's an ideal, but you've got to
yes, I agree with you, in effect. I'm not sure in my own mind. I haven't decided whether I agree with pacifism or not. But I'm speaking from the point of view of the politicians then in England. I mean, Mr. Chamberlain, he thought he'd made a peace treaty in the Treaty of Munich. He thought he'd satisfied Hitler and he'd stopped the war. And he came back to England jubilant. And all the people in England were amazed and thrilled. And then within a year, the whole war had broken out.
Well, I think what you state about the moral thing of the whole affair, you said it would have been morally right if Britain would have not stood the Germans. I think that is wrong.
No, but you can't. Well, you can't.
Let him finish, Elizabeth.
Well, you see, I think if ever there is, you're attacked by another nation, and you know, or at least you believe, that the right is on your side, that is the war of defense. A war of defense is necessary and is morally right.
No, you cannot defeat evil by evil.
Yes, and how do we know we're right? I mean, everybody thinks they're right.
Well, of course, that's quite a difficult thing about it. But as long as you know that your rights of living are attacked by by another nation or by an aggressor, your defense is necessary, and you should take it.
Let's try to probe into this in another way. Can you make any comparison between the situation in the 1930s and the situation today in terms of the threat of war and war building up?
Yes, I would say there is a lot of comparison between the world situation in the mid-30s and today. In the mid-30s, there were two political parties, and these were the Nazists and the Fascists and the Japan making one world and the rest of the world making another world. Today, this seems to happen here. The Democrats on one side and the Russians, the Communists on one side. So naturally, there is a tension amongst these people as there was in the future, in the past.
Yeah, and I think this tension is due to the development that people are not ready to give in for a compromise anymore, but like the status quo. They like the Korean peace treaty. Oh, it's not a peace treaty yet, but they like the...
Armistice.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you. They just don't like it, really, but they think it is good for a time. They think the German dividends is good for a time, and they think how they solve the Israel problem in the Middle East is good for a time. Yes, and they have not the courage, and perhaps not the encouragement by the other nations, by development of political affairs, to tackle these problems, really.
But these things take time, and you can't rush things like that. I mean, surely one stepping stone. If you try to do things suddenly, you often get in a worse mess than you're in before.
Just a second, Christoph. I want to pick up a point that Navy made because it almost brings us to an inevitable conclusion. Judy said she thought war was not inevitable. Navy disagreed with her completely. Then Navy said that there is a complete similarity. You said that there is an alternative to war,
yes,
didn't you? Yes, and Navy said he disagreed.
No, he disagreed with me.
Oh, he disagreed with you. I'm sorry. Well, we'll take it with you and Judy. Then Navy is now pointing out that there is almost a complete similarity between the situation in the 30s with the democratic powers against the fascist powers and the situation today with the democracies on one side and the Russians on the other. Well, does that...
Yes, but nowadays, I suppose, I don't think any nation wants war. But I suppose you can say that about the 1930s as well. But Hitler did, didn't he?
Well, is there anything different now?
Yes, they don't want war. At least I don't think they do.
And the fear on both sides is so strong that really no one dares to begin a war. It is because well, I think it's the atom bomb.
That atom bomb is quite wrong. Way back in the 12th century, the Pope made a decree. He said that this new crossbow, which had just been invented, no one was allowed to use it because if it was used, the whole mankind would be swept, would be wiped out. Well, that's what we're saying about the atom bomb. We don't really know. There might be even worse.
Well, look here. Oh, look here. Science has stated that the atom bomb is such a horrible and such a man-killing weapon.
The said before, and he was never wrong.
Oh, well, science found out. Now, you just can't find a similarity to the 12th century, I think. You know, I think that is what the balance of power nowadays is. That what keeps the peace, or at least the that you think peace is, that there are no weapons arise and there's no men being killed and things like that. Real peace is something very different. But the thing that we can achieve right now as some sort of balance, very balanced, outbalanced power, and that nations in fear of one another do not start a war. They know a war they'll start will be unsuccessful in any case.
Yes, I agree with you. I think that at the moment it is fear which is stopping any war. America, well, the West and the East possess equal power, if you like. But surely fear isn't a good thing to have behind. I mean, well, it's a very unsure basis for peace.
Yes.
There is one thing that the present generation should be proud of. That is the United Nations.
Yes, I agree.
And this organization, rather than encouraging war, discourages war. And actually, there couldn't be, war couldn't be an alternative, and peace can only be established by means of moral development.
Yeah, but haven't we seen that that the United Nations have been, well, they have achieved quite a bit, okay, but you know, they have not been very powerful. One veto, and the whole thing had to be stopped. The whole thing had to be redone, talked over again, and of course, democratic government it takes a very long time. Especially, I think, a world government is a very hard thing to achieve. But the thing that could be an alternative to war is not, to my opinion, not the United Nations at the present moment now, but it is the fear, and that is some sort of guarantee for peace. And out of this fear, you said it's a bad thing to have behind, but I think out of this fear will arise a more reasonable way of understanding the other and looking at the other. I'm sure about that. The fear is only a thing that holds on for short, but it doesn't keep. Yeah, it has to be stirred up really, and it is not stirred up like it should, like it can be by a Cold War.
But do you consider...
Wait a minute, Judith disagreeing completely.
Entirely. I think a lot of the most evil things in this world are caused by fear. Yes. Fear and ignorance.
Yes.
I mean, that's... I can't quite explain it, but I'm sure it would just be impossible to get peace through that basis.
Well, there is one thing that seems to hinder the real expansion of peace throughout the world, or the maintenance of peace throughout the world, and that is this Cold War that seems to exist between Russia and United States.
And that's caused by fear.
And by suspicion.
Well, that springs from
yeah,
fear,
of course. But
it?
I think that this fear can be overcome by the readiness to understand. Well, you see, I'm on this forum. I think it has been a great help to all of us to know the other side of it, and to get to learn other points of view. And I think if we try to get them to aspects of international politics, and try to get them on the Russians, try to get them on the Americans, try to get, then there might be great help towards an understanding and an overcoming of fear.
Let me interrupt just one second. You implied a moment ago, both of you talking about the atomic age, that nobody would win a third world war. Did anybody win the last one?
Yes, Australia won the last one. Yes, we did.
Well, don't boast of it. It's a horrible thing to boast of.
Oh, but no, I'm not boasting that we killed a lot of people or anything like that. I mean economically. Economically, we were in debt to Britain, and we paid back.
Thank you.
We paid back through the war a lot of our debts, not only the interest, but the capital.
But
we had, as Prime Minister, Mr. Chifley, who everyone admits was a financial genius.
Well, of course,
so, of course, it was not only the war.
Well, but look here. Is that a good pay for a war? Is that an equal pay for a war that has been, where 50 million people have been killed? I think it's,
no,
in any case, it's not. And if we look at it from this way, this aspect, is that right aspect? Good. Then we'll find out that nobody really has won the war up as to the things they put in it. The only thing that has been won, of course, is that the threatening has been taken away from the world, and that
But has it?
that half Germany has got a democratical government, and the other one has not.
In other words, you can't win a war unless you win it by peaceful means.
But you can't
As
have a
for
war.
Ethiopia, you know,
If you
as
didn't-
for
Oh, no,
Ethiopia,
Quite.
Just a minute, let Navy have a chance.
as for Ethiopia during the last war, though she hasn't been much involved in the Second World War, has won a great deal morally.
Oh, really?
Yes. The people before the World War or before the Italian aggression were divided socially, as far religiously, and many things. But afterwards, they feel the real need of unity, and the Italians themselves taught the dignity of labor, and everybody was working hard to maintain a decent standard of life, which are the basis of Western civilization.
Well, but look here, I think that is very typical for the development of war, that the nations that are put in the most of the force and most of their
And look, here's Johan. Now, you're so anxious to get into
my
this.
sentence.
Let him finish. Okay, I'm sorry, Christoph. Finish. Johan, wait.
that the nations who put in all their force and all their money, that they don't really achieve a thing from it, but they lose it, actually.
Yes, war is an economic loss to both winner and loser.
And not, above that, not only economical.
Now, if we do find an alternative to war this time, what do you think the force is going to be? I interrupted you a moment ago when you were saying it was going to be fear. Is there any other thing that's going to motivate us, or is that the sole...
There must not be fear. Fear must not be... You said another thing. I don't think you should have fear. I should think there should be just one other thing. Fear.
Well, but how can you get away from it?
Well, you see...
I think Albert Schweitzer has summed it up very neatly in several words. If every nation would recognize reverence for life, and every person in that nation, then if every person did, surely the politicians at the top would.
Yes, but it's a little difficult now.
Let's not look at the politicians as being bad persons, please.
No,
Well, the only solution I see to that problem is probably that there's a development of understanding. And that is, if we have that, we have the main condition for peace.
What were you going to say, Navy?
If the tension between the United States and the Russians is reduced or lessened, this only is the alternative to war.
Johan, you want to get in this so much.
I think you're all forgetting one very important...
Let me introduce you first. Johan from Norway. Johan Holst from Norway.
Yeah, I think you're all forgetting one very important factor about the United Nations organization. You see, today they are trying to prevent war in a positive rather than a negative way. That is, they are trying to establish a decent life for every human being, such as stated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, you know? And the work being actually then, the very important work by the different sub-agencies of the United Nations in the economical, social, educational, and medical field, that is, they create a foundation upon which it will be possible to build a dynamic peace. This is a great difference between the United Nations and the former League of Nations, which only aim at re-establishing pre-war conditions. And I think you cannot discuss whether war or peace without taking this into consideration.
Well,
Yes,
that takes such a long time, you know, until you're there. We need peace now.
Yeah, Navy, you said that there was an almost complete similarity between the situation in the 30s and the situation today. Would you agree with Johan that there is this brand new factor
Yes, I
that's
agree.
coming into the situation today?
I agree. I never thought of that until Johan pointed it out.
Because Ethiopia would be a country who would benefit greatly
Oh, yes.
from economic development. Do you think this is worth a discussion?
Yes.
Well, should we do this next week?
For underdeveloped countries.
Johan, will you come back on the program next week and talk about
I do
this?
hope I will come back, and I'll tell you what I really mean. Yeah.
All right, well, we haven't any more time now. I'm terribly sorry. Our half hour is up. But next week, we will go on with your challenge and discuss this new factor, removing the economic causes of war.
I think that will be very interesting.
This has been The World We Want, a program featuring students from 30